Okay, so I'm sitting today with Tamara Liebman from Calibrate Legal, and I really enjoyed talking to Tamara because she makes legal stuff really easy to understand. So Tamara, thanks for sitting with me again.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I always enjoy these chats about fun legal issues for businesses.
Well, this one I wanted to get a bit of an overview. There's loads of legal things that could make life hard for you, and things that you probably want to know about before they're a problem. So Tamara is going to sit with us and talk to us about an overview of a whole bunch of risks and liabilities that you have as a business owner. So, let's jump into it.
Sure, let's go.
Yeah, well, one of the risks that business owners have is their employees. The way they conduct themselves, the way they present themselves to other parties, and all of those sorts of things. So what can we think about with employees?
Okay, well, sort of from a legal perspective, from a business perspective, obviously employees are like one of the biggest costs in a, wages are one of the biggest cost lines for a business. So you need to kind of make sure that you have the right people with you so that you get the best out of them and that you reduce your risk. The risk with employees is obviously to the business itself is if there is a problem between the employer and the employee, then there is potential for personal grievances, and then that is a financial risk, and there's always a risk of ending up in the employment dispute system. And, to be honest, even the best employers will end up in employment disputes at some point because they just happen so frequently, and there are so many people working in your business, and they come and go. So don't panic about it, but make sure that you get the right legal support at every stage when you're working with employees. So don't try to wing it and don't try to handle it yourself. Get specialist employment advice when you're hiring and when you are firing, and all the bits in between.
Cool.
Yeah, and then I suppose in terms of, the employees and the wider community, well, there's not any particular sort of legal aspect to that, or, that I can think of it. So, yeah.
I was doing my MBA, and there was a component of that they touched on that was a real eye opener for me, and that was agency. And I know that sometimes people, in order to make their employees feel good, they give them a status title that makes the employee feel valued. But from the outside perspective, that person suddenly has the authority to do things in line with that title.
Right.
And so I was learning that if you're going, you're therefore giving that person agency to do stuff, and you need to consider whether that's appropriate for that person, and if there are parameters, because if that person goes out and makes a promise on behalf of your company, and that other party believes they have the authority to do so, you have to go through with it, whether you've...
Yes. Yeah. So you need to have good systems in place in terms of, entering into contracts and who has authority to do that and who doesn't. Any sort of decent-sized organisation should probably have something like a delegations framework that says, in each role, what is that role, permitted to do and what they're not permitted to do, and what needs to be pushed up to the next level, and so on, and to make that super clear. I guess if your employee does what they're not supposed to do, you are still going to have to, follow through and deal with it, but then at least you have some recourse with your employee in terms of a disciplinary approach. Yeah.
Gosh, the thought of being an employer is just such a terrifying thing to me. But all the people factors, on paper it's, I'm going to put a person in to do this function, but then all this throw-offs from that.
Yeah.
So that's one component of risk and liability. What about IP?
Okay, sure.
There's lots of people that are kind of bootstrapping and jump on Google to grab an image for a purpose and stuff like that. What kind of risks are there?
Yeah, well, so that's you've got a copyright breach risk there. And actually I helped someone recently who they were in the process of, taking their own photographs for their website, but in the meantime, they just needed some images, so they grabbed a few off the internet, and then they received a letter from like a licensing agency in Scandinavia saying, we represent this, copyright owner, and you have used these images and not paid a license fee. So here's the invoice for that fee. And you have this many days to pay. And the client was, quite sort of really taken aback because she hadn't even thought that this sort of thing might happen. And then, of course, she felt, she paid. She managed to negotiate them down a bit, and she paid, even though actually with a overseas claim like that, the risk is quite low that they're actually going to take you to court because you're in New Zealand and they're in Scandinavia. But, she wanted to do the right thing. So she paid for that. But basically, you can't just grab things off the internet because they are somebody's copyright. And there are, agencies just combing through websites on the internet looking for images that have been taken without permission. So that's an example. Another example is trademark infringement. So if you are using a brand name, firstly, if it's original and you want to protect it and make sure that no one else starts competing with you using the same brand name, you should get protection by registration on the Trademarks Register. In New Zealand, and if you're marketing overseas, you should consider doing that in overseas jurisdictions. In New Zealand, it's very cheap to get it trademark registered, not as cheap overseas, but so it's a good place to start is here.
Yeah.
So firstly, protect your own mark, and then if you are looking at branding, do what we call clearance searches, or get someone to help you and make sure that there's nobody else already using that trademark. And definitely not someone who's got it already registered, because that is an expensive undertaking to have to rebrand once somebody sends you a letter saying you're infringing on our registered trademark. And
the amount of time that you lose gaining that traction for the brand as well. Yeah, it's a mission.
It can be quite heartbreaking. Don't necessarily rely on your designers to know whether or not someone else is using something similar. That's sort of not their job. They, obviously it's their job to make sure they create something original for you. And if they are copying, then they're, they're infringing as well, but that's not going to help you. So you've got to make sure it's, take it as your responsibility to make sure that what you end up with isn't infringing. And that's the same with not just branding, but also, packaging design or anything like that, because that's all copyright. So, basically make sure that everyone that you are working with understands the importance of making sure work is original and it's not going to infringe.
And I guess with living in the digital age, those searches are more and more simple to do because everything's at your fingertips.
Absolutely.
Whereas in the old days, that was a lot clunkier.
Yeah. And then there's other little things that people don't think of. People think that if you have a company name, it means that you have exclusive use of the words in that company name, so ABC Limited, but there's no trademark protection in a company name, and someone else can start company ABCD Limited, and there could be confusion if they're in the same industry as you, but that is not the company's office's problem, and it is not going to help you. So try to come up with something quite original, because everything is so nationwide now in terms of doing business. I've had situations where you've got a electrical company in Auckland and one in Christchurch, and they have very similar names, and then their suppliers send the invoices to the wrong customer, basically, because the names are so similar. And the fact that one's, they're in different islands, maybe, 20, 30 years ago, this wouldn't have been a problem because everyone was really only working in their area. But now it's just more ability to get confused.
That probably ties nicely in with some of the fair trading stuff and confusion and misleading, and that's some more risk and liability.
Yeah, absolutely.
That we can segue across into.
Sure, let's do that. So the Fair Trading Act is New Zealand's trade practices legislation, and it controls how people in trade do business with each other and with customers. So small businesses, I think, often think that they're not really subject to these big scary pieces of legislation. They're just for big companies, but they are not. They're for everyone. So one of the big ones in the Fair Trading Act is that it is completely illegal to conduct misleading and deceptive conduct in trade. So, you can't make stuff up. You can't leave stuff out in a way that might be misleading, right? So people will sign a contract with you because you have conveyed an impression that isn't actually true. That kind of stuff is illegal. And you can either be sued under the Fair Trading Act by a customer who is unhappy with what's happened. You could be sued by your competitor because of a breach. So the competitor doesn't have to be say directly hurt, but they can sue you anyway. And then in fact, if it gets bad enough, the Commerce Commission, which is the government agency that enforces the Fair Trading Act, the Commerce Commission can start investigating and take steps if it's, if there's, a lot of complaints about a particular type of conduct. And you see that with things like all sorts of things like batch booking companies have who have been and there's a really well-known one, but I won't name the company because I can't remember which one it is, but only posting 5-star reviews and not posting like 3 or 2-star reviews, so as to look like they're only getting good reviews, but and that is misleading, right? And you've got to put up all the reviews. You can't just pick and choose. So, yeah, that sort of thing the Commerce Commission gets interested in.
And it's not just a case of you shouldn't really do that. It's actually the rules. You have to not do that.
That's right. But, having said that, if you front up right away and apologise and fix it, you won't get sued. But if you just dig your heels in, they might come after you because... the government wants people to be able to confidently buy and sell goods and services in the market, and it's bad for everyone if people can't trust traders.
Yeah, and I guess we all go into business with that wholesome intention of just going out doing great work. We're good at our product or service, and we're going to earn an income from it. And having those parameters for minimum best practice makes it a level playing field for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think in New Zealand we pride ourselves on, lack of corruption and being, sort of transparent and good to do business here. And we want to keep it that way.
Yeah. Okay. Privacy. There was a lot of talk about privacy. There were a whole bunch of new changes a short while ago. That's a huge one at the moment, isn't it, really?
Yeah, and so the Privacy Act was overhauled and a new act came in 2020. So that's now, 2.5 years ago.
Kind of old,
Yeah, although I still keep seeing documents come past me and online that still say Privacy Act 1993. So if you've got any reference to the Privacy Act, please update your documents to say 2020 because it makes it really clear that you haven't looked at your paperwork for a while.
You may not be current.
Yeah, absolutely. So every single... and the expression is agency in New Zealand is captured by the Privacy Act. So that's, shops and schools and, banks and everyone has to comply with the Privacy Act. So every, small business, you need to, and that means following the privacy principles. So that means you have to assess how you operate in your business and make sure that every aspect of it complies. And so that's how you collect the personal information of people that deal with you, how you store it, how you deal with it, how you share it, how you disclose it, all of these things. And obviously a lot of small business owners don't realise that this applies to them. And then a lot of people think that all you need is that privacy statement on your website and that's all it is. And that's also not the case. It's about making sure that within your organisation you are handling all of these things appropriately. And if you're not, then, there are infringements. And then when the new act came in, they had beefed up the offences and infringements and the fines for infringements because really trying to set a strong expectation that people will comply. And now there's things like mandatory disclosure of data breaches.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, which, there was no mandatory disclosure before, and now there is. So basically, if any organisation that becomes aware of a data breach, it has to immediately contact the Privacy Commission and report it, and then, go through whatever appropriate process, whatever is appropriate for notifying all of their, all the people that they do business with, that they've, data's been leaked, that sort of thing. So, it is important to look at this regardless of the size of your organisation, and if you're a bigger organisation, then you should probably be hiring data security consultants to do an assessment and advise you and put the right structures in place.
And what constitutes as the sort of information that needs to be protected in this regard?
It's personal information about individuals, okay? So it's important to distinguish this from information about businesses. So for me, it would be my name, my birth date, my home address, that sort of thing. And that can be information that can be identified and connected with a particular individual. A lot of people confuse spam compliance with privacy compliance, and they're not the same thing. So I might just have a little tangent on that. So spam is, what we call sort of breaches of the Electronic Communications Act. So if I've named that correctly. So if I have put my, if I have a business and I have a website and I've got my email up on there, anyone can email me for business purposes. That is not a breach of my privacy, for one thing, and that is not a breach of the Spam Act, because I have given deemed consent because I've put my email address up there. So, if I don't want people to email me, about selling me stuff, then I shouldn't have my email address available for people. And again, so information about contacting me through my business, that's not a privacy issue, because that's not about me personally as a human.
Yeah, okay. Personally identifiable stuff related to an individual.
Yes, that's right.
And then spam's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
Because that changed, didn't it, as well, with, there was the do not call register because people had landlines. But now there's new ways of reaching you and cold calling you and...
Yes, so that doesn't get captured because that's not electronic. So phone calls and cold calling are still perfectly fine. It's emailing. I think there was that weird period where you were getting, if anyone remembers faxes, you'd get those like advertisements just come through your fax machine. Like that, I think that was like, which side does that get covered by electronic or not? Digital. But it is really, it's more stuff, through the internet, basically. Yeah.
Okay. I want to take a tangent towards something that my particular clients are going to be interested in, and I suppose it's not just with regard to loans, but creditor accounts and things, personal guarantees.
Right. Yeah.
People say, I'd never link my house with my business and various things, but can you talk us through personal guarantees and what people are actually offering when they sign something with their personal guarantee?
Right. So
what does that mean?
Yeah, sure. So a personal guarantee is when you as an individual guarantee the legal obligations of another person or entity, like a company. So in business, obviously, in many cases, it's, I have a limited company, but my limited company is a bit of a risk for lenders and landlords because it can go bust. I can liquidate it and, no one is really harmed, right? Yeah. So there is an ability to do that. And so the way that landlords and creditors want to protect themselves is to also get a personal guarantee from the person behind the company to make sure that if the company gets liquidated, then they still have the ability to pursue the guarantor for the remaining debt. So basically, that's a personal guarantee.
Yes.
Okay. And so landlords get them for premises leases, commercial leases. Banks take them for bank lending, for business lending. A lot of suppliers like to get personal guarantees as well. So that's, people who supply inventory for your business. The way they go about it sometimes isn't necessarily enforceable. When you squeeze in a little line in your T's and C's saying the directors give a personal guarantee, that actually might not be enforcing, but it might be able to wriggle out of it, because guarantees need to be really clear, and you need to have signed them and said, yes, I am personally guaranteeing. So, but these are the kind of areas where you're personally guaranteeing. And a personal guarantee means that if you cannot pay on it when you're sued, then you can be bankrupted. Okay, so then that's the next step. And if you are personally bankrupted, then the government's insolvency agency will take control of your personal assets and will liquidate them to pay your debts. So that's how they will grab your house.
Yes.
If your house is in your name. So one of the reasons why business owners often put their homes in trusts is to prevent this happening. And it is very effective if you put your house in trust before you start trading and signing personal guarantees. If you do it after, then that's a no-no, because it looks like you've done that transfer to the trust in order to avoid your creditors. And so then the courts can unwind those trust transfers. So when you're setting up in business, you need to kind of think about these things, think about what your personal liability exposure is going to be, what you should do to protect your assets if you've got, in particularly your home if you've got one.
And the sooner the better, isn't it? Because once it's in trust, it takes a period of time. I think it was 2 years for creditors and 5 years for the IRD in terms of
for anything that's already
protections.
For anything that's already been accumulated, because there's a 2-year clawback period for insolvency, and there is under company liquidations as well. So if you're thinking of growing your business, it's a good time to look at protecting your assets.
And I want to pause for emphasis on the points that Tamara's just made as well, because I see this so often where people think a loan is unsecured, there's no caveat being put on your property, therefore your property's fine. Really, when you're signing stuff, you need to talk to people like Tamara and really understand what it is that you're agreeing to with your signature, what is included, what's excluded, and what does that mean to you. Because, and in a hurry to access funds, we sign stuff, and it's not until we wish we'd read the fine print more closely that it's too late, usually. That's that understanding when people say, I would never put my house on it. Well, oftentimes you already have without realising that you have.
And I mean, I think often you're doing it twice at the same time. So I'm thinking, for example, of when you're buying a franchise and you might borrow money from the bank to buy the franchise. We're talking about big franchises, multi-hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy some of these big franchises. You're borrowing from the bank's taking personal guarantees, possibly a mortgage over your home, and then the franchisor is also going to want to take personal guarantees for the obligations of the franchise company that's running the franchisee. So and then you might have a little, then you've got, two mortgages. Sometimes you might have two mortgagors, two secured parties, two sets of personal guarantees. So just think very carefully about whether to even buy that business.
Yes.
Whether the exposure, whether the business is going to be profitable enough to justify that risk.
Yeah, and I suppose, as I say all the time, talking to your advisors when making these decisions, people, your lawyer and your accountant are helping you to measure that stuff, measuring the risk reward, measuring the profitability and all of those things, so that when you're making the end decision, you can confidently say, this is right for me and I'm ready, rather than, we get whipped up in the emotion of whatever the decision is. Sometimes I want to be a business owner, I'm going to do what I can to get this done or whatever. But that's why people like Tamara and accountants are there to actually balance and check everything. Yeah.
Sometimes we can't give you the green light. Sometimes you have to say red light. It's not a good idea.
Health and safety is a big one.
Yeah.
That's come strides over the last sort of 10 years, hasn't it, in terms
yeah.
of employee and stakeholder protections?
Yeah, absolutely. So the new act came in now in 2015, the Health and Safety at Work Act 2015. So that's, it's quite a while ago now. And that really beefed up the exposure of what are called PCBUs. So that's a person conducting a business or undertaking, and it's kind of a weird general expression because it's intended to cover the entity, but it also will cover the directors, the senior managers who have anyone who's got the ability to have some control over the business are going to be held liable if there are hazards and people get hurt. So, and then there are very, very big fines, and you cannot contract out of them, right? And you cannot insure out of them. Health and safety, because these are criminal prosecutions and these are fines, and you cannot get insurance to just cover that for you.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's a big deal.
Yeah.
And we have some industries, absolutely shocking industries like forestry, for example, where people are, getting hurt all the time. And it's so, worker safety is really, really a big issue. But health and safety, again, it applies to every single person, running an undertaking or a business, in New Zealand. And, even small businesses like ours, and technically we are supposed to have a health and safety plan. We need to have assessed our hazards. We need to make sure that if people are coming onto our premises, that everything is safe. So that's it's another thing not to forget about. And again, there are consultants out there who you can hire to do the assessments for you and give you the advice. But if you're a bit smaller and you think you can do it yourself, there's a lot of guidance. WorkSafe's website has a lot of guidance on it for small businesses, because if something goes wrong, you want to at least be able to say, look, I did my best. I tried to identify hazards and to protect people.
Yeah. 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 Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's probably a really specialist conversation. So
for sure,
for the purpose of this,
yeah,
just a wee nudge going, you've got health and safety obligations is probably quite good. But to extend that conversation, that probably needs a whole separate discussion with regard to your industry or your specialty.
Yeah.
So if you have questions about what you need to be doing, definitely take that one offline, because that's a huge one. Yeah,
and those are the types of people who help you with that. So a lot of employment specialists will also do health and safety because they're related. So, you can go and see a consultancy or a lawyer who covers all of that sort of at once. And that's sort of, I recommend, doing that together. But then there are also people who are just health and safety consultants who will come on site and identify, will inspect and identify and give you a plan and all that sort of thing. Yeah.
It takes. I actually have a wee tangent, because I was talking to somebody who's got this amazing project they're working on. The health and safety at work also covers mental health and safety, and so there's an onus on businesses with regards to bullying and
stress, and overwork.
So
absolutely.
It's quite a far-reaching. Health and safety at work means keep people well inside and out, really, and on your premises and in your day-to-day activities.
Yeah.
So I've got a couple of others I wanted to cover. And given the economic climate, can we talk about insolvency?
Yes. So, I mean, I guess we talked a little bit about it when we were talking about personal guarantees.
Yeah.
But insolvency is when, there's a pretty straightforward definition in the Companies Act, and it's when a business can't pay its debts as they fall due.
Yeah.
Basically, that's a company insolvency. And trading while insolvent is an offence under the Companies Act.
Yeah.
And directors of companies can be prosecuted for continuing to trade while insolvent. So often people think that they can trade their way out of the rough patch, and sometimes you can, and sometimes you can't. And if you keep trading, which really means keep incurring debts, which exposes your creditors and exposes your shareholders. If you've got, independent shareholders and minor shareholders, you're exposing all these people to more debt, that is really, really bad. And you do not want to be doing this.
No.
So it's important to stay on top of your cash flow, talk to your accountant if things are looking tight, and just stay on top of it all of the time. At some point, you and your accountant might have to have a conversation about, is it time to liquidate, to wind the company up and liquidate, because you can't trade out of the insolvency. And then, what happens in that case is a liquidator gets appointed, and then they work through, your contracts and your debts and kind of tidy everything up. And then, if there are personal guarantees, they can get caught up in that as well. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so a couple of comments on that. First of all, that's a very low bar. If you are trading and you're unable to pay your debts, that's a very, very low bar. And that's something that I see so much is, if I just get this loan, then everything will be okay. Or if I just
but a loan
get
is
this,
another thing that you've actually got to pay off.
Yeah.
So actually getting a loan to pay off debts.
Yeah. But it's also a mindset thing for that person. Really preparing in advance for stuff is better than reacting to stuff, going, and you touched on it with the forecasting documents, going, I know this is how my company's performing, I know there's where my shortfalls are, and this is how I'm going to overcome it. It's a totally different conversation from, help, people are chasing me, I need some money for everything to be all right. That's a completely different proposition.
Yeah.
And it shows the sophistication of you as a business owner, how prepared you are and how forward-thinking you are and how you manage those tough times.
Yeah.
And my second point's evaporated.
I was just, if I may, while you're mulling over that, is new businesses start off with enough capital to see you out for, 6 months to a year, especially if you've got a lease to pay, because it can take time for cash flow to come in, right? And I think you see a lot of businesses, especially, eateries, they open up and then, a couple of months later they're gone, and they just didn't have enough capital to see them through that initial stage. And I mean, that's already, you're trading while insolvent almost immediately in these situations, which is kind of terrible.
Yeah. And I guess this ties back to so many of the other points that we've touched on this morning, relating to being honest and transparent and not deceiving people, whether it's your customers, your suppliers, your employees. You need to act with transparency. I suppose having that moral compass with regard to how you're propositioning your offer, with regard to how you're displaying your business to creditors, everything across the board has to have sort of this minimum threshold for how you conduct yourself with regard to what you're getting other people to believe.
Yeah, absolutely. And having a long-term view that I want to be in this for the long haul. I'm not in to make a quick buck, and so I want a sustainable business. And then I think then acting in ways that will support that will kind of follow.
Yeah. And a sidestep from that, I suppose, is that a company is actually a unique entity. It's not actually you. It is its own
it is a legal entity of its own.
Yeah, and there's that confusion when you're starting out where you think you're intrinsically linked, but the company has its own status.
Yes.
And needs to meet expectations. There's a whole bunch of parameters on how you need to be or not be behaving.
Yes, and the different hats, the shareholder hat versus the director hat. And in small businesses, people are both and get quite confused about which they are at a particular time. And, and then...
that's I was thinking that's one for another day. That's a whole... and I actually think we probably will leave the shareholder director part. Because I think this is a really neat summary. I suppose putting it in front of people, there's a minimum threshold of the way you need to conduct yourself, and there are regulations that actually require it of you. It's not just you should be doing stuff. It's actually this is how you need to be behaving. Yeah, and there are repercussions if you don't.
Yeah. And I think, just remembering that the government and the law aren't trying to make your life difficult. The policy behind it is to create to have an economy where people can trade with each other with confidence, and that people can operate safely, and we can reduce everybody's risk across the board. Yeah, and I think have a positive spin on it.
Yeah, I love that. That's a mic drop moment, I think. If you want to know how any of this applies to your business, I think Tamara's obviously a very easy to understand advisor and very approachable. So I'll leave contact information for Tamara so that if you want to pick up the conversation, you go through directly to her.
Thank you, Gemma.
Thank you,
Sounds
Tamara.
good.